Okay, we're going to talk about the background. First, the historical background. The 5th century BCE was the golden age of Greek and arguably of Western civilization. And when people talk about that, they always really are talking about Athens. What an incredible place. A civilization that reached its apogee, its peak, very quickly, and then sputtered, let's say, in the 4th century, the following century, and then was gone. Okay, now we have to look to the east a little bit. The Persian Empire had expanded and had expanded. At the end of the 6th century, Darius II was the emperor, and he absorbed the Greek colonies on the coast of what we call Turkey, Asia Minor, Ionia, as they were called collectively, a great civilization already earlier. It's where the great Greek civilization began, which I'll tell you a little about when I talk about the philosophical background. But anyway, these colonies were absorbed by the Persian Empire around 496 BCE, always BCE, before Common Era. Okay, the Greeks on the mainland of Greece knew that they were next, and it wasn't long. In 490, the Persians attacked. Their numbers were not strong enough, their navy was not strong enough, and they were defeated by a coalition of the Greeks, especially the major powers, Athens and Sparta, who were rivals, but whose paths had not crossed much, because the Spartans never aspired to imperialism, never really sought an empire, and the Athenians did. Still, their paths had not crossed. The Greeks were never unified. Greece never really became a unified country until the 19th century, when Greece became an independent country, independent from Turkey, from the Ottoman Empire and the Turks. Okay. Now, so the great Battle of Marathon, from which we get the marathon race, was fought in 490. A combination mainly of Athenians and a few others. There were 10,000 of them maybe, fought 22,000 Persians, and by tradition, at the end of the day, there were 6,000 dead Persians and 192 dead Greeks. Well, this was an amazing moment. Let's compare it for a second and watch similar things happen. In 1588, moving ahead 2,000 years, the British fought against the Spaniards, the Spanish Armada, which was then the power of the sea of the Western world, and by luck and by skill defeated the Spanish. And this gave such an impetus, such a jolt of patriotism, of patriotic enthusiasm, that arguably it produced Shakespeare, or in the age of Shakespeare, Elizabethan greatness, and then Jacobean. Okay, in Greece the effects were similar. That is, they had this small non-country had taken on the world power, the Persians, and defeated them. Wow. So, 10 years later, the Persians came back. This time, more of them, and this time they came with some sea power too. Once again, the Greeks had to unify hastily and not very effectively, but they did. The Spartans won a great victory at Thermopylae. The Athenians won especially sea battles. Now, this time the Persians spent the winter in Greece, and they invaded Athens. The Athenians abandoned the city And so the Persians destroyed the city and wintered there. Then in the spring, when the wars began again, the Athenians and others defeated the Persians once again. This is the final defeat. Great victory. Now I mentioned the destruction of Athens because when the Athenians returned to their city, of course they wanted to rebuild it. And now they were clearly recognized as the power of the Greek world. In fact, the power of the Eastern Mediterranean world. And the Athenians especially started a course of imperial expansion. They formed an alliance which was called the Delian, D-E-L-I-A-N League. They forced some little towns and cities, smaller, to join them and to contribute to them. They kept the money on the island of Delos, sacred to Apollo. And then in 465, they shifted the money to Athens. They used the money to build the Acropolis up on that hill. They used the money to build the Parthenon, the Propylaea, and the other buildings on the Acropolis. Glory, artistic glory, but the Athenians' means of doing this were somewhat dubious, morally dubious, ethically dubious, doubtful, not good. Nevertheless, Athens was a power. Athens established colonies around the Eastern Mediterranean and also on Sicily and in southern Italy. Other Greeks established colonies there too. Okay, the expansion of the Athenians was a bit alarming, especially to the Spartans, and in 461 began the First Peloponnesian War. Peloponnesus. That war lasted from 461 to 445, 16 years, and ended inconclusively. Then followed a key period of 15 years of peace, 445 to 430. Remember, Plato was born in 427, 3 years later. More Athenian expansion, more building, more glory. And the real age of glory begins probably around 445. The Second Peloponnesian War began in 430, and it ended in 403 with the defeat of Athens. Athens was defeated by Sparta. The Spartans occupied Athens briefly, but they were not really interested in occupying Athens. They disliked democracy, though. Now let's step back. Athenian democracy begins really around 480, but it was established by some heroes, some martyrs too, an amazing phenomenon. And so the glory of Athens was inseparable from its democracy. Now this was, of course, not a full democracy. Women didn't vote, of course. Slaves didn't vote. And 2/3 of the population was slaves. But all men who owned some property voted. And this was a remarkable feat. And it's remarkable how successful it was, how well it worked. And the Athenians were proud of it, as they were proud of everything. They were proud of their city. And that's important, and that helped to produce their glory. I better tell the rest of the story here, because this is important for Plato. So in 403, the Spartans defeated the Athenians, tore down the walls which Heraclitus had erected, which had protected the Athenians so well, and then the Spartans left. They set up what is called an oligarchy. An oligarchy is ruled by a few, and that was Spartan style. And so the oligarchy took over, and some members of the oligarchy were close to Plato and Plato's family, so that Plato was kind of associated with them. And by extension, Socrates was associated with them too. Okay, the oligarchy set about as we say, settling old scores. That is, punishing the people whom they didn't like, the Democrats. So some were killed, others had to flee, their property was confiscated, and one of the people whom they set out to punish was Socrates. Now we have to talk about Socrates a little. Socrates was born in 469 BCE, a middle-class laboring family, but the story of Socrates is very important because, after all, Socrates was Plato's hero. And Socrates dominates almost all of the dialogues. An important exercise is to attempt to discern, to distinguish how much of Plato's teachings in any of his dialogues belongs to or should be attributed to Socrates, and how much is just Plato. I'm going to parenthetically add something here. Dr. Shin and I are looking for a place that's relatively quiet in which to record this, and it reminds me that during much of my life I have taught in places like the back room upstairs. In my many years teaching for Maryland, I traveled to remote places and taught classes in back rooms and probably basements and attics. One must be flexible. One must be flexible and resourceful. Okay, back to Plato then. So, the oligarchy in Athens wanted to punish, among other people, Socrates. Why? Well, he was associated with many of the aristocrats whom they wanted to punish, but it was also his manner, his manner of asking questions, seeking, apparently, ostensibly, O-S-T, ostensibly seeking knowledge, but in fact demolishing, destroying the assumptions and the absurdities and the indefensible views of other people who were so sure they knew what they were talking about. So they set about to destroy Socrates. I'll tell you about that in a minute. We have plenty of time. And they put Socrates to death. And Plato apparently traveled at this time. It was a good idea for him to be out of Athens anyway. And by one tradition, he traveled for 10 years, and traveled especially to Egypt. And the Greeks of the 5th and 4th centuries venerated, looked up to, revered the Egyptians as doing everything on a far grander scale than the Greeks did. So anyway, Plato apparently traveled. He had spent a lot of time apparently with Socrates and with a circle of especially young men who adored and looked up to Socrates and who were, in a sense, his disciples. So Plato was one of these as a young man. Okay, then Plato, I'm now talking about Plato, so maybe before talking about Plato, I'll talk a little about the philosophical background within which Plato grew up and started to philosophize. A group of philosophers known now as the Pre-Socratics, before Socratics, Socrates. These people, some of them knew each other, but mostly they didn't know each other. I'll tell you a little about them because they are the first philosophers in the world, really. What does it mean to philosophize in this sense, and what did the Pre-Socratics do that was so revolutionary? In the first place, they begin in the 6th century BCE, which was the heart of, which was an amazing time, arguably the most amazing time in the history of the world, in the history of humanity anyway. maybe some earlier time when agriculture started, or the wheel was invented, or making laws was invented, or something like that. But 6th century, this was the age of the Buddha. This was the age of Lao Tse and Confucius, whom we call Confucius. What do Koreans call Confucius? Dr. Shin?
Yugyo. Gongja.
Gongja.
Yeah.
Yep. This was also the age of the Upanishads in Indian religion, Indian philosophical theology, really. And some other amazing people, Mahavira in India, and Zarathustra, the one we call Zoroaster, blah, blah, blah. An amazing time when man's whole view of what the world is, what life is, what a man is, changed radically. And the Pre-Socratics are part of this, and rightly so. Now, usually people say that what the Pre-Socratics tried to do was to stop thinking in mythical terms, attributing the earth and things that happen, nature, to the gods and the workings of the gods, and trying to start thinking in what we call rational terms, without reference to the gods. So, the first Pre-Socratic was Thales. Now, mostly the Pre-Socratics, the first Pre-Socratics were all in Ionia, that area on this coast of Turkey. This was before the Persians took over in 496. Most of these Pre-Socratics in Ionia, who were called Milesians mostly, tried to claim that all reality could be explained in terms of one element. For example, Thales concluded that water is the ultimate element and could explain everything. He was very ingenious, a brilliant man. Some of the other men figured some other element as the ultimate element, but what they wanted to get at was what is the ultimate element in terms of which the universe can be explained. Well, this is very different from myth, unless one assumes that this is just a different kind of myth. That would be my own assumption, but that's okay. Then, a second famous, the most famous maybe Pre-Socratic, is Heraclitus of Ephesus, also of Ionia. Those Greek colonies on the Turkish coast. Heraclitus is still famous for the thought, which was not his main thought at all, but anyway, the idea of flux. And the point is that everything changes all the time. If everything changes all the time, then we can't even make a statement about anything. It's impossible to make a statement about anything, because whatever is, or what we think we see, of course, is changing even as we say it. Not only that, but we are changing even as we say it. Not only that, but language that we are using, this vehicle that we're using, is changing, is a changing thing. Everything changes. He's famous for saying, Heraclitus, that the same man can't step in a river twice. Well, the river is a perfect image of this, because the river sweeps by. The man, too, has changed between the first time and the second time. The river has, of course, changed. Okay. But Heraclitus' main idea was that the principle of everything was the logos, what he calls the logos. And for him, the logos is the law which governs these changes. And opposites change to opposites, but the pattern is there for a wise man to discern, to figure out. This would affect Plato quite a lot. The other main Pre-Socratics were all in Italy and Sicily. And the most important one is Parmenides. Parmenides was the first champion of logic, of logical thinking. And he said, basically, nothing changes. Change is unreal. Motion is unreal. I have a few notes here. Time is unreal. The universe is one monism, one unchanging thing, and change is only illusion. He figured this by thinking that, okay, I can't, either nothing is real or the universe is what he says it is. Logically, this is true. Either nothing is real at all because of Heraclitan change, or everything is real, but if anything is real, it doesn't change. If anything is real, it doesn't change. If it changes, of course it's unreal. And Heraclitus, extreme Heraclitus, was right. So, Plato grew up, Plato became a philosopher influenced by three things. One, he had to find a way around Heraclitus, flux, change. He had to find a way also around Parmenides. Everything is one, change is unreal. His third influence, of course, was Socrates. And Socrates mainly was an influence in the sense of Socrates was especially interested in ethics, in ethical ideals, justice, truth, of course, but justice was perhaps his big idea. Let me check something. I don't want to leave anything. I better talk about a couple of other things about the good life. Just the good life is better than justice for Socrates. What constitutes the good life? Okay. Another thing about Socrates I better talk about a little bit. Socrates, okay, the first work by Plato that I'll refer to is called the Apology, and most beginning students read the Apology. It's the least philosophical of Plato's works, but it was done really in honor of Socrates. Because in the Apology, Socrates is on trial for his life in front of the 500 judges, his fellow citizens of Athens. In the Apology, Socrates explains why he did what he did. Early in his life, a friend of his went to Delphi to consult the oracle of Apollo at Delphi, 50 miles away from Athens, then and now. I won't go into explaining what that is. But the friend asked the oracle of Apollo, who's the wisest man of all? And the answer was Socrates. Socrates? No one expected that answer. So when they told Socrates, Socrates tells this story in the Apology, Socrates was thinking, well, I know I'm not wise. I don't know, I'm not even sure what I know. Maybe what the oracle thinks is that I'm wise because I know that I don't know. Everyone else thinks that he or she knows something, and therefore, wrongly. And in this sense, I'm wiser than everyone else. So he set about questioning people, especially those who claim to know about piety, for example, or justice, or the good life. He would question them and get them tangled in their answers. So they contradicted what they said because, of course, they did not think out what their beliefs were. They had only belief, not knowledge. As soon as we get to that distinction between belief and knowledge, we are jumping probably from Socrates to Plato himself. But doesn't matter. So Socrates tells about his life and defends his life to some degree in the Apology. The Socrates in the Apology is an abrasive man. Abrasive, like sandpaper. It's hard to like that man. Basically, I think we can assume that the Socrates in the Phaedo, for example, the wonderful Phaedo in which he meets his death, or the Symposium, wonderful Socrates, or the Republic, that man is surrounded by friends, admirers, and so he doesn't have this edge, this abrasive edge, this irritating, I don't care what you think, you're all fools anyway. That's his manner in the Apology. But of course he's not surrounded by friends in the Apology. He's surrounded by people, many of whom dislike him. At the end of the Apology, he's found guilty. He's found guilty. Okay. Now, let's talk about a really great work, because the Apology is not really a great work, I think. The Phaedo. The Phaedo is the most moving of all the works. Not the best, but the most moving, I think, because in this work, these are the final days, the final hours of Socrates' life. And Plato shows his literary genius for the first time in the Phaedo. In the Phaedo, Socrates has been put in prison. In a previous work, doesn't matter the title, one of Socrates' wealthy friends has told him, I will get you out of here, I will give you money, we will send you abroad. And in fact, in Athens, everyone, including Socrates' accusers, had expected this. No one really expected that Socrates would be put to death. He didn't have to be, because people who had any money at all, or who had friends who had money and power, could easily get the person who has been condemned to death out of the country. Socrates refuses, for reasons that aren't altogether clear. I won't go into that now, but now let's talk about the Phaedo. So in the Phaedo, by a strange coincidence, Socrates had been put to death, put into prison, but an annual festival happened right during those days, during which no one could be put to death. So the death was delayed by 12 days. Every day, his friends, a group of his friends, would come, stand outside the prison early in the morning until the man of the prison opened the doors and let them in, and they would go in and talk with Socrates and listen mainly to Socrates. We get the final session here, and a group of maybe 12 people goes in, and there's the great man. He's saying goodbye to his wife and child. The man at this time is 69 or 70 years old, but he had recently apparently remarried and had two young children. So he's saying goodbye to his wife, but the kind of contempt for women, veiled or not veiled, shows through. Women are these hysterical creatures, blah, blah, blah. Ironically, we're going to see lots of hysterical creatures. In fact, everybody in the room, except Socrates, will be hysterical. Okay, the Phaedo. So they start talking. And two young men who are really followers of Pythagoras. I didn't discuss him. He's another influence on Plato. I better discuss Pythagoras for a second. Pythagoras was a philosopher, but really kind of more like a religious thinker. Anyway, his thinking, which became basic to Plato, was that the soul is real, the body more or less unreal. That is, mortal, doomed to pass away. The soul is eternal, immortal. The soul, in Plato takes an extra step, but anyway, the soul is imprisoned in the body, but death then is a release of the soul. Christianity would pick this kind of thing up too, modify it a little. So we have the soul imprisoned in the body unreal, So death, if anything, is a blessing. And for a good person, namely a philosopher, death is a liberation of the soul from the burdensome, onerous body. Okay, so they're talking, and in the Phaedo, Socrates presents some arguments in favor of the immortality of the soul. In the end, these arguments are not convincing at all, just as there are no arguments that are convincing or probative, offer any real proofs of immortality of the soul, or frankly, of anything else either. In my own view, I'm an extreme skeptic, a radical skeptic. Plato, I don't think Plato would totally disagree with any blah 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 blah. Okay, so Plato presents, through Socrates, presents these arguments in favor of the immortality of the soul. These young men, Cebes and Simmias, present counter arguments. Dr. Shim, I'll go on for at least 5 minutes past our time, since so much time has been wasted. I'm sorry. Okay. Arguments in favor of the immortality of the soul constitute the main arguments in the Phaedo. But in the Phaedo, for the first time, Plato, because really it's Plato, presents for the first time his idea, which is central to his teaching, which is the existence of the forms, capital F, or ideas, which is a word that's less, which should be used much less because it has all these other uses that cause more confusion than light. Anyway, forms. What are the forms? The idea here is this. We see, I hold up two pens, and one is clearly shorter or longer than the other, and I say they are not equal. How do I know they're not equal? What is this equal? Well, I have this idea of equal, of equality. Where did I get this idea? Because there must be some permanent, some absolute idea or form called equality, in terms of which I say these two are not equal. Okay. Passing from this to different realms which are not really covered in the Phaedo, beauty. I say this woman or this work of art or this man or this pen is beautiful. What is this idea of beauty, this form of beauty? Well, for the first time in Plato's writings, in the Phaedo, he mentions and defends this idea, this theory of the forms, or the ideas. So, the point for Plato is, in this world, any knowledge that we might have of circles or squares or triangles or beauty or anything else, these are only beliefs. What we must try to do, what the philosopher does, that's the other main thing in the Phaedo, what the philosopher does is ignore his body, ignore the so-called pleasures of the body, and pursue knowledge, capital K. Where is this knowledge? It can't be in the transient, ephemeral things that surround us in this world, because all of these things are subject to change. Heraclitus. It must be the forms are eternal. The forms are absolute, unchanging, immutable, real. The philosopher wants knowledge. Therefore, the philosopher must seek knowledge of what is unchanging, real, permanent, the forms. This is the essence of Plato's teaching, and really he never abandons it. He stops talking about it a little later, mostly, but even in the late dialogues it comes up from time to time. I think he felt a little embarrassed about it. It was his belief, no question, but he also had lots of problems. For example, what is the relation then between, let's say, beauty and this beautiful cup? Is there any connection? Or is there this chorismos, this division, that is, they are absolutely separate, distinct? Now, for Plato, the forms are real. They have an independent, absolute existence. They alone are real. And for anything else to be real, it must partake of, participate in those forms. Okay. Enough on the Phaedo. Now, passing to, I think there are the three really great works by Plato are the Phaedo, the Symposium, and the Republic. Almost as great, second category, is the Phaedrus, not Phaedo, and later the Theaetetus. These are the great works by Plato, and the others are, some of them very negligible, minor. Okay, each of these major works was written during, except for the Theaetetus, was written in what is called the middle period, because Plato's writings are divided into early, middle, and late. For most non-philosophers, I'm a non-philosopher, the great works, the great literary works, belong to the middle period. The Phaedo, Symposium, the Republic, and the Phaedrus. These are great literary works, more or less. In the later works, Plato writes like a philosopher. That is, they're very dry. They try to rigorously follow logic. They seem just to go nowhere, are very boring, frankly, to the non-philosopher. Philosophers claim to be interested in them, but I wonder. But, okay, they're interested in them. So a real philosopher is a little skeptical about these literary masterpieces because they're not very philosophical. They are very speculative, very literary, and frankly, religious. Okay. Let's pass to the Symposium then. If I had to choose the literary master, well, no. But Symposium is the most loved work, I guess. Okay, what happens in the Symposium? A symposium is a drinking party. The word is used for amazingly different things now, but even etymologically it means drinking together. Okay. In the Symposium, a young man has just won first prize in the Athenians' drama contest, tragedy contest. His name is Agathon. And he's a fairly wealthy man. So on the night of his victory, great party at his house. Many people were there. Heavy drinking. The night after that, a select few are invited to Agathon's home. Among them Socrates and some famous people, including Aristophanes, the famous writer of comedies, the master of comedy. Okay. The party starts, and one of the speakers, doesn't matter who, says, "Look, I drank too much last night. Maybe you did too. Let's not drink tonight, or let's not have the obligatory drinking, Korean style, I think. I hold up my cup, you better hold up your cup too. Or the boss holds up his cup, you better hold up your cup too. And if the boss is a heavy drinker, then you are too." Greek style also. Anyway, so let's pass up the obligatory drinking and just drink as we want. And a second idea is, let's take turns trying to celebrate Eros, the god of, we think, sexual love, but Eros is much more than sexual love, as is clear in the Symposium. Eros is desire for permanent possession of happiness. What do we strive after in order to get this permanent possession of happiness? We have maybe children, because our children will cheat death a little bit. We strive for immortality, literary immortality or artistic immortality, fame. We try to leave something behind us that will cause people to remember us, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So, each person at the symposium delivers a speech in praise of Eros, and the sophistication of these speeches rises a little bit, as they go around the room. But the last speaker, by design, of course, Socrates. So by the time we get to Socrates, many things have been said. Socrates, in fact, he's so playful, he's so wonderful in the Symposium. He says, "Strange, I thought we were supposed to talk about Eros, but none of you have talked about Eros. I think I'll leave." And of course they all say, "Oh, please, please stay, Socrates, and tell us about Eros. We know we are asses. We know we are fools. Tell us about Eros." And he says, "Okay." So he delivers the very famous speech, one of the 2 or 3 most famous passages in Plato, in which he tells especially about his association with a woman, not a relationship at all, much older, she was much older, named Diotima. Did Diotima ever exist? Probably not. It's interesting that in Plato he selects a woman as the mouthpiece for wisdom, and Socrates, she treats Socrates like a little fool, about like Socrates treated the other guys. Charming, absolutely charming. What does Diotima say? She says, "We pursue, ultimate truth for me is beauty, capital B. Unchanging, absolute, not beautiful this or beautiful that, but beauty itself. A form, obviously, the form of beauty. And the ultimate good, the great good in life, is to get a glimpse of that, to see that beauty itself, absolute beauty. How can we do this? Well, we begin as a young man, for example, by noticing beautiful this beautiful woman, that beautiful woman. For the Athenians, these Athenians, beautiful boy, homoerotic culture, especially in the Symposium. But gradually we realize that we're interested in beauty itself. We realize that what makes this woman or boy beautiful is this idea or form that we have, beauty. Then we elevate our search. We look for beautiful customs, beautiful laws, because we're looking for a beautiful, just society. That's a much higher goal than just beautiful this or that. We climb as in a ladder, and this ladder is called the Ladder of Contemplation, rising from topic to topic, broader and broader, until we are talking about and looking for, trying to get a glimpse of beauty itself. Absolute, philosophical, really, beauty. We do this by a process which he would later call dialectic. Dialectic is two people questioning and answering. I make a statement, you analyze it, you criticize it, I revise it, you revise it, we work together, trying to get at knowledge, trying to make clear statements, trying to use language as well as we possibly can. In the Symposium, suddenly, by this process of dialectic, we might suddenly have a mystical glimpse of that beauty, absolute beauty. We see it, and we have seen what is ultimate truth. Now, at the end of his speech, everyone is silent for a moment, and suddenly there is a loud noise at the door. A group of drunkards has entered, loud, very drunk, led by Alcibiades. Alcibiades was a great man, but a strangely flawed man. I won't go into him, but a wealthy, very well-educated man, and in the Symposium, a great man. Okay, he enters very drunk. Am I welcome here or not? Absolutely, says Agathon. Come and sit over here. I'm glad you're here. And your friends can be here too. And now the serious drinking will begin. So Alcibiades takes a seat. Now, seats were like on couches or sofas, they were kind of called, and people lay down horizontally here, propped on an elbow, eating or drinking and so forth. And normally two people shared one place. So he lies down, not noticing where he is. Suddenly he sees the great man, Socrates. It's a wonderful, wonderful moment. Immediately he is sober. Immediately his demeanor changes completely. You here? Where? I can't get away from you. And of course, next to the beautiful Agathon, because Agathon was physically beautiful too, of course you'd be here. And then the second half of the symposium really is an encomium. Encomium is the word. Praise, a speech of praise, or eulogy, if you like, for Socrates by, of all people, Alcibiades. I won't go into it, but it's moving and great. So what do we have in the symposium but really another eulogy, praise of Socrates, just as the Phaedo was, of course. Now I want to tell you about the most important work, and I guess the greatest, the Republic. The Republic is much longer than these others. Socrates is speaking, but mostly it's a monologue. The questions of Socrates, the questioners have ceased to be important at all, and Socrates is simply speaking to his listeners and admirers, worshippers really. And the topic is justice, because the good life must be linked to justice. And the good life is the passion of Socrates. That's what he's looking for. That's what he tries as a philosopher to lead. And in the Phaedo, which is an earlier work, but he dies there, clearly he has led the good life. I didn't mention this, but in the Phaedo, when he dies, he's not sad at all. He's cheerful. Everyone... Of course, everyone else in the room is howling, but he's cheerful, and he accepts death happily because he thinks death is a blessing to a true philosopher. In fact, philosophy is the study of dying. How to die, why death is really a blessing. Because he hopes, he trusts to pass out of, didn't mention this, reincarnation. Forgot to mention that. Socrates, Plato believes from Pythagoras, not only in this soul imprisoned in the body, but also in reincarnation. We are born over and over again in many different ways, and he will tell at the end of the Republic what those ways are, how that works. But in the Phaedo, Socrates had said that he hopes to escape from the wheel of rebirth, because the philosopher who leads 3 consecutive good lives as a philosopher escapes, he believes, from the wheel of reincarnation and lives in everlasting bliss in the company of other philosophers. That is paradise for him. So back to the Republic. The most important part of the Republic comes kind of in the middle, and the main myth, there are 3 myths, but the main myth is the allegory, so-called, of the cave. And this is the single most famous passage in all of Plato. Much more famous than all the other things. And really, in some ways, it is Plato at his best, I think, because it's a great myth. Plato loves to tell myths, but most of the myths, frankly, are not as great as people say. I'm sorry. But there's one great myth, and that's the allegory of the cave. So, Socrates says, behold, here's what life is like. We are in a subterranean cave, a vast cave. We are chained to a kind of bench, hands and legs chained, faces chained. We can look only forward, and we're looking at a vast wall. behind us, far behind us, is a huge fire, like a bonfire. And between the fire and our backs is like a stage. And the things of the world, chairs, tables, automobiles, rockets, computers, doesn't matter, they all go by on this stage. So the fire casts the shadows of those things and casts our own shadows onto this wall. The point, of course, is all we know of ourselves and of the world is shadowy, more or less unreal. Every once in a while, someone, he doesn't say philosopher, but really must be a philosopher, is released from the chains, unchained, and that person can then turn around and look and see the fire. Well, the fire hurts his eyes, of course, and many people would prefer to sit back down and chain me. I prefer the shadows. But some of these philosophers, let's call them, turn around and acclimate their vision, acclimate their eyes to the fire, so that they can look into the fire, at least a little bit. Some few want to escape from the cave and mount up the long pathway leading to the surface of the earth, out of the cave. If such a person arrives up above on the surface of the earth at noon or in daytime, he will be blinded by the heat, by the sun. But if he arrives at nighttime, well, okay, he can get used to things, see the stars, see things still shadowy but closer to reality. And if that person gradually can accustom his eyes, acclimate his eyes to seeing things even by daytime, philosopher, the great people are the people who can ultimately look into the sun, because the sun is the source not only of all light, but is the source of all life. Without it, no life. The source of all truth, the ultimate truth, is the sun. The philosopher who can look into the sun sees everything and has knowledge of everything, because sees the relation between ultimate reality and other things, and knows truth, has knowledge. Short of that, no real knowledge. Well, what is this but Diotima's ladder of contemplation in a different way? By the way, in the Republic, the ultimate good is the form of the good, not beauty, like in the Symposium, but the form of the good, capital G. So it has an ethical dimension, which the beauty did not have, because beauty is an aesthetic reality, though he certainly means more than aesthetic beauty in the Symposium. Anyway, this is the allegory of the cave, and it really is great. A great description of life, and depending on what one's beliefs are, one can easily adjust it to one's beliefs. Again, the essence of Plato really is, at least in the early and middle Plato, but later too, implicitly, not explicitly, hidden. The essence is to try to get beyond belief to knowledge. Knowledge of this world within terms of this world, impossible. Language, impossible, because unless the forms exist, language is just as shadowy, just as insubstantial as everything else that changes. Has no reality, has no permanent meaning at all, has no truth. Consequently, we are hopelessly caught in the realm of shadows. The forms must exist, or there are no truths. Now, these forms would become easily shifted to apply. Christianity quickly adopted a mostly Platonic view of things early, because everyone was a Platonist or a Neoplatonist. It was impossible to escape from Plato's influence. And a famous man of the 20th century, Alfred North Whitehead, is famous, among other things, for saying that all philosophies are footnotes to Plato. And I think it's probably true. To some degree, it's certainly true. All Western philosophy is indebted to Plato profoundly. So he's the prince for the Westerners anyway. The rival prince is Aristotle, who has a much more belief in the reality of things in this world, and really is a scientist, a botanist and a biologist and a zoologist, but a great philosopher too. But he comes after Plato. Okay, thank you.